Colleagues, we have a quorum at the appointed time. Pardon me 1 second. First item of the agenda, confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on 11th October. The minutes have been distributed to members prior to the meeting. The Secretariat has not received any proposed amendments. If there are no objections, the minutes are then endorsed. Second item, information papers issued since the last meeting. After the last meeting, Secretariat has issued 16 information papers, and the details is ready on the revised agenda. Item number 3, time of the next meeting and item for discussion. And on the 11th of October meeting, and the members had raised views on the item for discussion for the coming legislative year. Myself and the Vice Chairman on 15th of October had met with the Secretary for Commerce and Economy, as well as the Secretary for Innovation and Technology, and the item for outstanding discussion had reflected the views of the members. And on the leakage of personal information by Cathay Pacific, as well as the protection of personal information and cyber security related matters, and we met with Mr. Horace Chung and Mr. Gary Chen of the Constitutional Affairs Panel and the Security Panel. The three panel will have a joint panel meeting on 14th of November 2018 from 8:30 morning to 10:30 morning on conference room number 2 for a joint panel meeting. And the government reps and the Cathay Pacific, as well as the Privacy Commissioner of Personal Data, will attend the meeting. The CAP Secretary had given notice on 30th of October to invite the members of this panel to attend the meeting. The next regular meeting will be held on 10th of 12th, 2018, Monday, 2:30 in the afternoon in conference room 3. And the government proposed discussing the following items, 3 of those. 1, with the open data policy. Second item on the list of outstanding items for discussion, and review of telecommunications regulatory framework, review number 3, item 3, and review of the film development fund, item number 4. Now we move on to item number 4. Capital Works Reserve Fund Head 7110 Computerization Subhead A007G Export Allocation, New Administrative Computer Systems. Okay. Can we please invite the government representatives in the room, and then they will give a brief introduction. May I remind members on the Declaration of Interest according to 83A and 84 of the RRP, if the members have a direct and indirect pecuniary interest on the discussion item, please disclose the nature of the interest before you speak. After the brief introduction, we shall now then open the floor to members. After the discussion, we shall sum up our position. We shall wait for the government reps to be seated. And we'll welcome Dr. David Chung and the Secretary for Innovation and Technology, and Mr. Lam Wai-Kyo, Government Chief Information Officer, and Deputy CIO, Ms. Donna Chan, and Ms. Eva Yam, PAS for Innovation and Technology, and Mr. Gavin Wah, Acting Assistant Government Chief Information Officer. Oh, so we'll be the Undersecretary then. Chairman, as in the past, we will apply funding from the Finance Committee in the next financial year to implement the projects under Subhead 7A007GX in the according to approved projects and the project proposal submitted by BD and anticipated cash flow position. We recommend the estimated provision to be 1.12 billion, and increase of 60 million, or 5.7% higher than the provision for 2018-19 to implement 830 IT projects. The bureaus and departments will utilize the funding proposal to step up their IT progress, as well as to step on AI, analytics, and chatbot technology, as to adopt the EID to enhance provision public service to improve city management and improving quality of life, as well as to promoting the development of smart city. The bureaus and departments will continue to offer a system upgrade to optimize the use of cloud technology and will enhance the functionality and efficiency of the IT system. On information security, the various departments will enhance data protection and cybersecurity and regularly conduct risk assessment and audit to ensure the defense capability. And for the next year, the projects will take the pro-innovation procurement policy. I hope the members will support this head funding and will welcome any questions arisen from this funding head. We have 3 members: Chen Ming, Mr. Eddie Chu, and Charles Mock. 4 minutes question and answers. Mr. Chen Ying. So in the enclosure B, it was mentioned that the 710 had there will be a total of 128 projects. So if it would be approved by OFGIA, it would be under the ceiling of 10 million. The maximum will have to issues. It's just to only list out the current cash flow requirement instead of the approved funding expenditure. For the 509 projects together with the extra 223 projects, what is the total funding proposal approved? I'm also more concerned on cybersecurity. According to the police information, for 2017, there are 5,567 computer-related crimes involving an amount of 13.9 billion dollars. I wonder if we're devoting enough resources on the government computer system. And for the FC funding request, and last year, it was only 1.06 billion, and the Secretariat claims last year, and there are 40 projects related to data information security, about 17%, about 108 million, and this year only mentioned there are 230 new projects. So how many of which are related to information security? Can you give us a percentage and the actual amount? Third question, and for the 2020 electronic identity, and will each department will supposed to redesign the EID related websites. So only in this way they are compatible with AID. And for we only see one project, and for on item 163. So by this progress, there are other applications for funding will too tight for the application for 2020. So who will take this question? Chief Information Officer. Fair for Mr. Chan's question. So for the information security, IT security, we have over 40 projects. Well, the amount is about 18% of the total number of new projects, actually 1% more than previous year. And the relevant expenditure is about over $140 million. And besides the one proposed by the departments, and some of the projects are initiated by or responsible by the OFCIGIO. And for new proposals, we have 230 of those. Even though the expenditure is about 198 million, and the total expenditure will be more than that, will be about 1.25 billion. So about 230 million projects. The total expenditure will be 1.25 billion. Why is only 1.09 billion this year? Because some of the project will run for 2 to 3 years, and for the first year, their outlay isn't that much, and for the second or third year, where the most of the money will be spent. So overall, there will be 230 million on $1.25 billion. And for the electronic identity, require the departments to cooperate, and the OFGIO will come with the application program interface API that allows the department to link with the EID. And Mr. Chen has been correct and noticed that this year that all the funding had to do with EID, and the reason being, if the after the API have been completed, it may not require a lot of resources to dovetail with launch. And for those under 0.2 million, there's no need to pay through this block allocation. Makes Mr. Eddie Chu. Thank you, Chairman. I feel that this item was only attended by ITB, which is underrepresented. Since this block allocation involved different departments, and we would like to add a question on individual projects such as the AFCD, for example, the fish on number 4 and 7, and let's say the upgraded fisheries and petrol enforcement system and the redevelopment of plant and pesticide system lines. So I don't have a question to ask the relevant departments. And for the question on the individual projects, where can I follow up? I wonder, and also the chairman can provide some guidance on that. And especially the police. And this authorization that will allow it for spending under 1 million can be put under this block allocation. And I noticed that for the police, where the data security is concerned, we have 8 of them, and following 110, 113, 113, 116, 120, 119. So together they are over 40 million. And 4 of them are very close to the $10 million ceiling. Since it all have to do with data security, why are you allowed to split up into 8 projects that make them don't need to come to FC for individual scrutiny? Can you explain why you're allowed to split into 8 projects where all have to do with data security? Who will take the question? 2 big question here. Mr. Lam. So 2 questions here that we can try to answer the question. Well, on the fisheries patrol and the pesticide licensing system, can you tell me what it is? Item 4 and 7. 4 with the upgraded fisheries patrol and enforcement system. I'll let the deputy CIO take the question. Microphone not on. That system is already an existing one.
But then the software might be obsolete. That's why we need to do an upgrading. So the whole purpose is to ensure that security can be kept. Well, there was a news report recently about this. Well, that's within Hong Kong waters. There are many mainland fishermen crossing the boundary to put in some cages to catch fish. So in terms of the enhancement of the fisheries patrol and enforcement system, has that got anything to do with stamping out such illegal fishing by mainland fishermen? Well, concerning such details, we can only provide the details after the meeting. Okay, then please do ask the relevant department to give a written response to Mr. Eddie Chu. Is there a chance for us to discuss that? Because at the development panel, when we discussed the block allocation, there was a chance for us to put detailed questions to the individual project officers. So is there a chance for us to do the same here? All right, you can submit your questions to us with regard to which item that you need further information, and then we can ask the relevant departments to give you a detailed written reply. But what about the breaking down of the total sum into individual items? In fact, if you watch it more carefully, in fact, we're talking about different systems here. And for individual system, we need to strengthen data security. And when it's about different data systems, we would not be treating them as one single item. That's why we have to deal with them separately. And of course here, you're referring to different departments and they are proposed by different departments. And if indeed when they ask for funding, and if we can see that there is a suspicion that they are actually breaking that down into smaller projects, then we will ask them to give details and they'll have to give us satisfactory answers. But then for the buildings department, for example, item 16, you're talking about stepping up or strengthening data security. In fact, you're actually having data security for individual systems, and then for police they can also break it down into different systems, and then they have to step up security and so on. So out of the 16 items, in fact, you're talking about one single purpose instead of having 8 separate projects from the police. In fact, they're all entitled to strengthening data security, because the original estimate of $2.1 million for strengthening data security, we should be able to complete data security for many different systems. Mr. Mock, all right, you're talking about over 200 items here. And these are budgeted under the block allocation proposal. What I'd like to know is, other than the block sum that you're aware of about the manpower requirement and also detailed allocation of funds and so on, within this year, how much more would you need? For example, full-time staff and also contract staff, how many more do you need? What is the estimate? So can you give us the details? Yes. GCIO. Well, when we do such items, usually we would be working on the following. First, if they are civil service staff, basically we are not going to increase the manpower just for the purpose of projects under the CWRF. But then for contract staff, when necessary, the departments concerned can hire some time-limited contract staff to work on these projects. Thank you. Yes, of course, I'm aware of that. But then have you done any estimates? For example, how many contract staff will you be requiring? For example, you just said that for civil servants, you would not be increasing the establishment in order to cope with this. But what about contract staff? Do you have any estimates? Yes. Roughly speaking. Yes, the deputy GCIO can answer. Well, in terms of manpower requirements, well, for new projects, we'll set aside about $32 million for the extra manpower that we'll need. So about $32 million for the extra hands, and then you can also translate that into the number of staff that will be required. Yes. But then these are new items. But then for some existing items, upon their completion, we will also be able to save some manpower. That's why, roughly speaking, we may not be increasing the manpower per se that much. But then out of the budgeted sum, some $32 million will be for the recruitment of contract staff. In fact, in the past, we have seen that some departments which might not have been involved in similar items, and now they are doing more. And all of a sudden, at the OGCIO, you would be deploying some senior SSMs or even more senior staff to help them to manage such systems. So on this occasion, how many departments will be needing similar assistance? Because there are some important projects coming up, and as a result, they might need to have such a secondment from the ITMU. They might need to have secondment of staff who are at senior levels in order to help them so that they can manage their projects better. So can you give us the details? Yes, GCIO. Well, for these minor projects, we will not be increasing manpower for that. But then all of a sudden, if there is a sudden surge in the number of small projects, would there be such a need? Basically, no. But then if we can see that for a particular department, if it needs to step up its management function, then we will propose that they should increase the manpower in order to do their management work better. I can give you an example. For example, for the IP, the intellectual property department, they do not originally have a senior manager, but now they have introduced this new title in order to cope with the situation. So basically, we do not encourage them to do that. I'll line up again. Okay, Mr. Ray Chen. Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I'd like to ask the administration. In the past, the administration promised that some 99% of government forms will be digitized so that they can become scriptless. And of course, we would support that because that would facilitate members of the public filling out those forms. What's the progress now? Because for community halls, if you apply for hiring such venues, you will have to fill out a form manually. So on this occasion, with regard to system upgrading, I can see that there is an item which is very common. You talk about the replacement of the electronic or e-leave system. What is that? So is it for staff of that department to apply for leave? So whenever there is a similar project, in fact, departments would be asking for hundreds of thousands of dollars or even up to $1 million or so to deal with that. So why can't we have a centralized system from the CSB to deal with that instead of having individual departments to upgrade that or update that? And also, with regard to the cycle of such upgrading exercises, that different departments would have a different cycle. Can we achieve better savings? GCIO, 2 questions, Madam Chair. First, on some digitization of forms. We have about 3,000 such forms, and earlier on we said that about half of those, 1,500 of those forms can be turned digital, but then for the rest, for various reasons, we have not been able to do the same. And then for the 1,500 or so, within this year, we should complete about 99% so that they can submit those forms online. But then recently, we have also reviewed the situation, and we note that in fact, we do need more forms because we're talking about 3,100 forms, and about 1,500 can be submitted electronically. And then later on, when we introduce the EID, in principle, most of these forms can be filled out and submitted online. In the past, the reason why it could not be done was because of the signature issue, because we require the signature of the individuals, and now we are not able to do it. That's why they cannot be submitted online. But then once we are able to do that in 2020, in the middle of 2020, once we introduce the EID, most of the forms, according to our calculation, about 3,100 forms, about 3,000 of those can be submitted online. And of course, for those requiring the taking of an oath or declaration, that cannot be done. But then out of these 3,000 forms, we have already made plans for that. Within a year of the introduction of EID, that is by the middle of 2021, most of these 3,000 forms can be submitted online. Next is about the e-leave system. Well, the deputy GCIO can supplement. In fact, for e-leave system, the CSB has already got a main system, but then for individual departments, they also need to deal with their own leave application, and therefore they have their own servers. So basically, we are replacing the servers, and also to upgrade. We're trying to upgrade the systems. So do they have to do that once every few years, and they will take turns to do that? Or is it that after the main server has been replaced, they'll have to replace their separate servers? So is it going to be a regular exercise that takes place once every few years? Well, for most of these systems, they have been in use for many years, and therefore they are already obsolete. That's about the hardware. And also for software, there are also new versions. That's why they will also have to be updated. And at the same time, there are new functions. That's why we'll be doing that simultaneously. These are once in several years exercises. But how often would that be? Well, the cycle would be about 4 or 5 years. So the intervals would be 4 or 5 years. So usually it would be between 5 and 10 years. Well, I'll ask the last follow-up question. I'm also interested in this e-leave system. Okay, my question is like this. So taking the LCSD as an example, okay, you have the 5-day week now, and then for the LCSD, some 65% of the staff would have to work 6 days a week. And whether they are working on 5-day or 6-day week, well, the working hours would be 45 hours, but then for those working on 6-day basis, and if they apply for leave, then instead of deducting 5 days, they'll have to have 6 days deducted from their leave balance. So when I asked a written question, the reply from the department was that with regard to the e-leave system, well, the system has not been able to deal with the revised leave deduction mechanism, and as a result, they also have plans to update the system, and they would also have to develop a new system. So with regard to the unfair leave deduction situation, well, that will not be dealt with because of the electronic system. So my question is, how come this is the case? Because given the fact that the administration has already introduced the 5-day week system, then all departments' e-leave system should be able to deal with this so that they'd be able to deduct 5 days instead of 6 days, instead of having departments coming up to say that, well, I have not been able to deal with that, that's why that will have to continue. So even if you apply for 5 days leave, you will have to have 6 days deducted from your leave balance. And also, will you be reviewing the situation with regard to all departments, requiring all departments to have a separate system? You should have one single system to deal with all departments, and then all of a sudden you're told that, some departments will take 5 years, some will take 10 years before they can update the system. That will not be fair. Well, for the e-leave system, it has not been developed by the OGCIO. It was developed by the CSB. So basically, the CSB, the Civil Service Bureau, would look at individual departments' requirements and needs before coming up with such a system. The reason why it has not been able to deal with the staff of LCSD's leave application, well, I have no idea, because in terms of calculation of leave, that's not part of the work of the OGCIO. Well, it is under the portfolio of the CSB, and it should have been able to deal with different scenarios instead of just 1 or 2 scenarios. But then right now, what we have seen is that individual departments have their own e-leave system. Well, let me also explain this. Basically, well, as the Deputy GCIO already explained, there would be a core system which is handled by the CSB. So this is a core system developed by the CSB, and then individual departments will have their own servers. So with regard to the core, that would be placed in a core to run. But then for many of these servers, they are already obsolete because with the introduction of the new system, the old servers might not be able to cope with some of the new functions of the new systems. That's why they will have to have their servers replaced. It's not that they have their own very unique needs. In fact, for individual departments' needs, they have been developed by the CSB centrally. So it's about the service updating. For example, for the GCIO, we also have our own system, but then we would also be installing the system given to us by the CSB instead of developing our own system. So would you be making suggestions to the CSB so that it will have to update its own system, or else it will not be able to resolve this problem? Yes, we will follow up on that. And also, given the fact that you have already got a centralized system which has been developed by the CSB and other departments are just using them, so why can't that be placed under the government cloud in providing the service instead of having individual departments having their own servers and so on?
And would they have to upgrade their own service every few years? So why are we still having this practice these days? Well, can't we just put the system on the cloud? A rather outdated one, isn't it? Well, Chairperson, I think it's feasible actually to put in the cloud. So 1 or 2 years ago, we studied into the option of putting it on the cloud. I haven't followed up as of recently, so I suppose we can follow after the meeting whether it can be directly placed on the cloud instead of having each department installing on their own server. So take this system for example. When you put this e-leave system on the cloud, so each department would not have to update their service periodically and upgrade the system as well. It would save a lot of public money. Have you do the math? on the savings. Well, necessarily, well, the cost of running on clouds will need to purchase some cloud services, and to buy a server, well, the cost may be roughly similar. So if it's running on a cloud, the maintenance and will manage to achieve some savings, so we can follow after the meeting. So it's just really just one of the examples of which is one of the system that worth looking into. I believe there are other system that used by a lot of departments that will consider to enhance their functionality, and as to dovetail with the smart city development, for example, EID and cloud services, big data. So I hope they can take a gradual approach. Thanks for the chance to suggestions. Mr. Charles Mock. If the government information officer will see that some department can run on cloud, if you request that you going back to the old method, you will need to give a strong advice against so. You just mentioned sometimes the cloud and the server are cost roughly the same. Well, when you are procuring the cloud services from us, that in the long run, the cloud able to achieve savings, there will be less capital expenditure, while the increase in operation expenditure, however, and all you're able to achieve some savings. Well, that's what you said when you are procuring cloud services. So if some department insists on using on the old method, how can strongly advise against or continuing these old practices? Allow me to respond. Well, we have an old cloud system, so we are building a new one. So the old cloud system is not particularly cheap, whereas our new system will commence on the third quarter of 2020. And when we commission the new system, we'll request all the departments, unless for very special, strong justification, to just switch to the new cloud. So I hope that you wouldn't spend too much money on this about to be replaced system. And also noticed that is a 7-1 head that you have this $10 million financial ceiling. So since its creation in 1990, since we created 710 computerization subhead, well, in 93 to 96 that you have raised the ceiling from a few millions to 96 to raise it to 10 million. So it's been like 22 years. Well, a $10 million back then for what you can buy with that money is vastly different. It's necessary to raise the financial ceiling so that you have more flexibility to expedite it. Since some of the equipment have been aging very severely, I wonder have it had to do with the excessively low ceiling and failed to adjust with inflation. I would like to know who can decide erasing the ceiling. Is it the Treasury, CSTB, or FSTB? So how do we start the discussion? We mentioned that at the previous meeting, and we also done some investigation. We have looked into it with the FSTB. And to raise the financial ceiling, there are a lot of factors to consider. And for example, the recent project cost price fluctuations, I can say it really require a holistic review. So tentatively speaking, so does that mean that 10 million is not enough? Well, that's probably not the case. Some of the project we try to break it up when possible. We're not doing it on purpose, but we do it with justifications. Well, if we break it up the project to the smaller ones, they will quicker in approval and allow the small vendors to bid on them. So looking at the annex, a lot of them are smaller projects that doesn't really reach as high as 10 million. And of course, over 10 million, we ought to have a established mechanism to obtain approval from the Finance Committee in LegCo. So we'll continue to explore that with the FSTB. If warranted, we shall activate the mechanism. Of course, we'll consult this panel and obtain approval of the FC before we can raise that ceiling. If there's no one asking, so can I continue my questioning? Some other members have questions on some projects, and sometimes we will guess on the policy direction from individual projects. I know this is probably not your ambit or not your problem, but sometimes the department themselves fail to explain. So we see they have had this computer such a system, and will give rise to a lot of policy questions. If you don't know the answers from that, maybe you have to inquire the relevant department. I also have a lot of questions in my, but I want to concentrate my questioning on the HAD, on the replacement of computers and network equipment for district councils. So are you referring to the meeting venue of the district councils, or the offices in the 18 district councils, or simply limited to that? As we can see, while a lot of people who are working on open data research, that information provided by these in terms of open data is rather backward and differ among different DCs, lacking a common standard. So would you take this opportunity to do some standardization? Well, I'm not. Well, have the same format of LegCo, whether for the meeting minutes and papers provided. It seems that different DCs have their own practice. Well, it's not a problem with design. It's just the formatting, the website design, and for the type of information provided. It seems that each have their own practice. So do you know that if this is not included in this replacement exercise, I wonder if the HAD have any plans to revise their practice? And while the scope of the project will be the 18 District Council, HDC, which the DC Secretariat will have 5 desktop computers and other kind of equipment. So this time we replace the computers and the laptops to enhance the service and the speed. So it's more concerned of that function. So it's very obvious it doesn't include what I said, but I'll follow up with the HAB to see how they can improve on that. But if you have the opportunity, well, as the IT advisors, so on the next meeting when we talk about open data, well, district council are a major issue. Someone would take reference from LegCo as example on how to provide quality information on formats. And in the past few years, the LegCo secretary have done a lot of work on it. However, at the district council secretariat, which is HAD, well, there seems to be a huge gap in standards which they need to catch up on. So as an advisor on IT and on open data, which you probably act as some kind of consultant, you have to push them to do more. And also separately, I would request it to HAD as well. So on the panel meeting on open data, so maybe at the next meeting, can discuss with then how the DC can be improved. Very much agree that the DCs would have a first point of contact with a lot of the members of the public. If they can improve their public, there will be the beneficial to the governance. Some members also asked on the step up on IT security. So somebody have the HST BD, and they have few projects what had to do with strengthening IT security. So besides the rise of technology crime, there's other incidents of personal data leakage. For each department, will they appoint someone to do the edit account with their own ways to strengthen security, or the government have a holistic directive on tell them what to do? I'm worried that some department will be very ahead and do a good job. Let's say the discipline forces and the police will be more concerned, whereas other departments, like for the REO, so we can see they are very obsolete. So for the overall government IT security, what do you plan to do? So we shall examine this from multi-angles, since attach great importance to it. For example, the management, the framework, the guidelines, employee training, and the procedure flow and technology. So we're responsible for a few of these areas. When we look at items 165, that on the IT security risk assessment and audit for critical and department services. 165, that through assessment and audit, we can ensure there's some critical system can comply with the guidelines and standards. We also should replace the network equipment, which is item 166 of the Central Computer Center, and 167 also had to do with the departments, because we require the OGCIO to evaluate each department that whether they can meet the guidelines and the policy. So would they need as individual project to assess individual departments? And on training, last year we had a project to help the whole government to guard against phishing activities. In other words, through drills, education, and training to help the colleagues at different departments of the Bureau to enhance their awareness in dealing with phishing website attacks, and to enhance their knowledge on phishing sites. And last year we have that risk information portal. So one of them is the internal portal. So was have a sharing with different departments, which there's a monthly bulletin to different departments to let them aware of these security concerns that need to be addressed, and regularly perform drills with them to enhance their risk awareness. And different departments would need to comply with the governing management framework, so need to conduct their overall system assessment every 2 years.
And before replacing their system, they would also have to go through security checks before they can introduce or roll out the system. And if it involves personal data, they would also have to go through the privacy assessment before they can roll that out. Okay. Yes, Mr. Charles Mock. Any further questions? If not, then I'd also like to ask another question. I can see that under different projects, there are items involving the smart city blue map or blueprint, but then it's not seen in all departments. Is it because of the timing and so on? Because we can see that under the smart city roadmap, supposedly all departments should be rolling out similar projects. So what is the timing of rolling out such projects in different departments? Yes, GCIO Well, basically, it's a year that straddles several years, and it's up to 2022. And starting from last year, we have already been asking for funding to do that. And then when the time is not up, then they might have to wait for next year. And also for those requiring less than $200,000, they would also not be required to do that, and also some of it would be under the OGCIO's funding, because not all of them are IT projects, and that's why part of it will be paid for under a separate head. And also, when we apply for funding, some departments have not yet thought through the details of the project as to what they should be doing, and they may not be getting the funding next year. So we do have this mechanism in place to allow them to do that in the middle of the year. For example, if they need to do that, or if they have to advance certain projects, then they can also insert some new items in the middle of the year. And if they do so, then for items that do not enjoy a high priority, they may have to defer it until next year before they can do it. Okay, any further questions? If not, then okay. I do not see any member objecting to this, so in principle we support this funding proposal. Okay, so let's move on to the next item. So that's the license fees reductions for five types of licenses issued under the TO, and introduction of a new fee component under the unified carrier licenses. So thank you for coming. Welcome to the Permanent Secretary from the CEDB, Mr. Clement Leung, and from the Office of the Communications Authority, Ms. Elizabeth Tai, and also Mr. Sandra Chuk, Acting Deputy Director General from the on telecommunications, and also Mr. Sam Lee, Assistant Director, and also Ms. Javi Chen, Head of Finance from the OCA. So please walk us through the paper. Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and members. Well, the purpose of this paper is to propose to adjust the license fees under 5 types of licenses issued by the OFCA, and also the introduction of a new fee component under the UCL, while the Communication Authority Trading Fund is operated on commercial basis, and basically we recover the cost, and we look at the financial performance of the OFCATF and make adjustments to the level of license fees when necessary. We have looked at the CFA. By the end of last year, there was a ruling by the CFA on license fees, and also on the basis of cost recovery, we have made the proposals. And also recently, there's a license fee review, and we have also taken into account all the feedback and input from the stakeholders. And basically, there are 5 types of license fees where there is room for downward adjustment. That's why we propose that we'd like to adjust those license fees, and at the same time, we'd like to introduce a new fee to tie in with the latest trends on WIoT in Hong Kong. And my colleagues will be doing a PowerPoint presentation to walk you through the details of these proposals. With your support, within the short term, we'll be coming to this council to submit the relevant amendments to the relevant subsidiary legislation, so that they can come into effect by early next year. So with your permission, Madam Chair, I'd like to ask Mr. Simon Lee or Sammy Lee to walk us through the details. All right, over to you, Mr. Lee. Thank you. Madam Chair and members, I'd like to walk you through the proposals. In the PowerPoint, you can see that there are two parts to this proposal. First, we propose to reduce the existing license fees for 5 types of licenses, and second, we introduce a new license fee. The first part is about 5 license fees under the under the telecommunications ordinance, and for the blue part here, with regard to communication services, including the customer connection fees, and also the public radio communication service, and so on. And there are certain items including mobile radio stations and so on. So the number depends on the number of subscribers. At present, for every 100 customer connection, we charge them $700, and we propose to reduce that by $200. In other words, that would be reduced to $500 for each set of 100 customer connections. And then another type would be the pale blue part. So it's about mobile station fee. That's for public radio's paging services. At present, basically they're in the transport sector and also some engineering company. They would use some walkie-talkies, and the present fee level is that for every mobile station, they'll be charged $270, and we propose to reduce it by $50. So the final fee is that for every mobile station, they would be charged $130. And then next is a new device fee. So we propose to introduce a new WIoT device fee, and for every 100 set, they'll be charged $200. So in coming up with the proposal, we have taken reference from the following principles. First, as the Permanent Secretary just said, is done on a cost recovery basis, and on that basis, we are proposing to adjust downward the license fees that have brought in a surplus. But then for other license fees, there are different items, and therefore in choosing which item to see this fee reduction, basically we try to identify items where there is a huge surplus, and of course there might be other policy considerations. And second, we try to maintain the surplus so that there will be room for downward adjustment for other license fees. For example, within a specified period of time, for the reserved surplus, we try our best to use that to allow for fee adjustment or for downward adjustment. Last year, the Communications Authority also introduced a new license fee so that there would be a more relaxed licensing criteria, so that for those using 900 to 950 megawatts spectrum, other than paying the fixed license fee and also some basic fee, they would also have to pay for the customer connection fee. They will have to pay $200 for every set of connection, and they can also look at the UCL that they've got, and they can also provide the mobile IoT service, and they can use the spectrum that has been designated to them in providing the service. But then under the present UCL system, for every WIoT device, we would treat that as a customer connection, and therefore if it's under the present system, if the network provided by the operator is such that they will have to provide every set of 100 WIoT device, and they will have to pay $700, and if it's to be reduced to $500, then it's similar to it would be somewhat higher than what we introduced last year. And therefore what we are proposing right now is that there would be a new fee item under the new system, so that for every 100 WIoT device, they'll be charged $200. So that under the UCL, the service fee will be the same, and that will also be better in line with the cost recovery principle. And also, assuming that we've introduced the fee reduction proposal, then what is the financial implication on us? According to our latest estimate, the trading fund will be exhausted by about 2021, so all the surplus will be exhausted. So for the license fee, we expect that starting from the year 2021, we will have to withdraw from our development fund. We have already set up this development reserve, and we have $692 million. We expect that by 2021 to 2025, we will still be able to maintain the operation of the trading fund. And of course, with the new fee structure, we will keep an eye on the license fee mechanism and regime, and at the same time we will also be looking at our financial projection and also the situation with regard to our trading reserve or development reserve. As I said, between 2020 and 2021, we expect that we will need to withdraw money from the reserve, but then that would also depend on the actual financial performance of our trading fund in the next 2 years. With regard to public consultation, well, the CA, well, on the 8th of August, on the 8th of June 2016, we introduced a consultation paper on the new licensing fee mechanism and also the new WIOT mechanism. We consulted the stakeholders, and originally it should have ended in July, but then in light of feedback from the trade, we extended that to the 1st of August, and during the 2-month consultation period, we received a total of 7 submissions. Well, there was general support for the adjustment of the licensing fee and also the introduction of the WIOT, that is the new fee to be introduced. But then there were also suggestions on the fee reduction proposal, and there were alternative views being submitted. Well, the Secretary for CED and also the CA issued a joint statement in August, and an announcement was made, and we proposed that the license fees reduction will be introduced, and also a new fee will be introduced for WIOT device. With regard to our timetable, well, for the UCL legislation, it covers the license fees and also the items to be charged. So if we were to implement the customer connection fee and also to introduce the new WIOT device fee, we will have to amend the relevant legislation. Our plan is that by the end of this year or this month or early December, we'll be gazetting the proposal and we'll be tabling the legislation to this council for scrutiny. And understanding the negative vetting approach, we expect to introduce the new fee mechanism early next year concerning the 4 remaining licenses. Including the public radio communication service and the virtual system, that is the mobile virtual network and so on. Well, with regard to the fee reduction proposal, that will be implemented by the CA, and the CA would be looking at the new fee implementation data for the UCL. They will be adjusting the license fee for the 4 types of licenses accordingly, and we expect that by January next year we'll be able to implement that. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Charles Mock, 5 minutes. Thank you.
Just want to get some information. How many WIOT licenses have you granted? Well, our data here showed there are 2 licensees. I see that charging $200 for a 100 set of device and for the 700, because much cheaper than the $700 previously. Well, considering the nature of the devices, these WIOT devices, I wonder if I got it correctly, that some claim that they have a tracking system in their luggage or any other applications. Well, the quantity compared to communication devices, let's say a phone or a beeper, they'll probably, the numbers are probably much more. Now you're charging a few $100s per 100 set of device. Even those is much cheaper than previously. So in the future, these WIOT devices, or systems, they could be so much more of them. And some of the devices, and especially those licensees, some of them are running on global networks where, well, for example, they can take a roaming approach. For devices come from abroad, the local system may need to serve them. So how do you do the math? Do you have to charge them the $2? We're talking a lot of money here. I believe that you're not doing it for profit or to make a income for their trading fund. I hope that the charge will be on appropriate levels to promote this. Well, would you consider the pricing model as appropriate, but is it unnecessary that when you levy a charge? Just wanted to focus on the WIoT part. Let me answer Mr. Mock's question. So on your last question, so we're not aiming for a profit by charging. We just want to recover the regulatory costs. You had a point that the use application of WIoT is different with mobile communication device. This WIoT devices, they're usually simple communications. They may not able to provide voice and video, or they might not carry all the capabilities of a mobile device, and it also will have nothing to do with using a phone number. So this kind of device or equipment will be hugely different from the mobile communication devices. So very often it will be a machine-to-machine communications. So that's why we have differentiating these three charges. So we're not charging the same level as that mobile devices. So we're substantially lowering the fees. But in the future will be a large number of them. Well, a lot of those in the trade predicted that after 5G, the application will be much more widespread, and it also carries the same function as the mobile communication device. So we're anticipating there will be a substantial increase. For this 2 years, I'm not seeing there will be an explosive growth in the area. Like I said, this fee adjustment may not be conducted frequently. However, we shall monitor the technological development and its application, and if we can see there will be very substantive growth, so we won't rule out. We'll conduct a regular review on the charge as well as the fees level. And for the Mr. Marx mentioned on the device on roaming, so I will defer to Mr. Sendachek of the Director General. And for the mobile devices, we shall not charge the roaming devices. So it's just when these devices are connected on the network. So there need to be a commercial contract established between the device and the operator. For the device entering into Hong Kong, they'll be excluded. So that this LP-WAN, the network exchanges, so in the future they'll be given the same treatment. So for so they will need to pay according to the number of subscribers. For the devices coming from abroad, they will be excluded. So how do you regulate them? So this company may not only have a presence in Hong Kong, so you anyway to regard them all of them as foreign devices, and therefore bypassing the regulation. So if the regulation is too difficult, you might just substantially reduce the charge. For example, only $200 for 10,000 devices, and offering just a lump sum. So should that be more facilitating the adoption? Well, the lowest the fees, they will facilitate the early adoption. So we'll probably just forget about this $2 per device. Would you consider that? Under the WIoT device figures, so it's really based on the figures provided by the operators. So we see the early stages of development, but so far, besides these local devices, they're probably rare for the foreign devices to use in a roaming mode. We shall closely monitor it. If that become a trend, that we could review our fee charging mechanism. Well, on the smart check at the airport, when all of a sudden they will use it abroad, and then while the foreign device will be used in Hong Kong. So you would just keep an eye on it. Just want to raise the question, or you need to consider as soon as possible to lowering and charge as a de facto encouragement. I wonder, is the cost really that high? So it's just $2 for each device. Is that really that high for the compliance cost? Like you said, it's just really self-reporting by the operators. So it's up to them to declare 10 or 10,000 of those. Your workload may not be that different. So assume that you're not really checking on them. So when we calculate the license fees, the operators will provide us a figure, and also require them to be verified by the auditor. So I believe that the data we receive is accurate. For the data received so far, the number is not substantial. And like the PS said, if the now we're able to support large number of devices, the technology will take up power, so we shall keep a close eye on it. Well, it's been audited. It's been audited, so that was their cost. So I wonder what you mean by cost recovery. So if we conduct a consultation and the trade is fine with that, then of course we can always start first. But you can think of it drastically reducing it as a form of incentive. So we'll look into it or review it. So let me follow up. Speaking of IoT, I agree with Charles Mock that even though the number may be small today because we don't have 5G yet, and the whole trade predicted that everything will be online, that everything will be on IoT. Well, with the procedures were complicated, well, a lot of time and effort we spend on auditing, and the costs will increase as corresponding to the growth of devices. If you aim to have cost recovery, if your cost will not increase as the number of devices, would you consider streamlining procedures? For example, each product or each company or issue a flat license fee instead of a fee charged per devices, so as to want more convenience and encourage the further development of the industry? Well, that we are aware that we don't have quite an idea of the what's happening in the future. We see there are a huge number of devices. So on the cost of the regulatory cost per device will be fairly low. So we shall take the first step from reducing from $7 to $2. That we'll consider a very steep cut. Well, if we see there an explosive growth in service and devices, then we shall take a look. So when making the first step, we don't see a very steep growth, but we want to be more forward thinking by reducing for $2 per device. And for the mobile service operator, the cost may not be much, but just want to provide this as encouragement. But if this was widely adopted, like in luggages and other forms, then we shall have room for further reduction. As all the current regulatory landscape, then the more the network connection point is quite complicated. Well, sometimes the mobile service operator may have more complaints. So, it's just prorated. If there are more customers, the number of complaints will rise, or there is a network disruption. So there'll be more customers affected. So based on what we can see and the approach we're taking, so it's just fairly appropriate, proportionate. So we use the number of devices as a criteria for setting of fees. So it's a good thing to be forward thinking. Hope that we can be more visionary, so that we have to come back to let's go when we actually run into problems. It's very difficult to do a financial projections. You claim you're using in the airport, for example, on the RFID tags. Well, if you want to charge them per device, or well, for device to mean by for every RFID strip, or just the device itself. So how do you calculate that? Well, speaking of airport, just want to know how do you charge them. So it just depends on the operator's figures provided. Just so is the device affixed it on an object? For if it's one device per luggage, so we currently only see them as one device. Well, we don't know how the market and technology would develop. And for the RFID you mentioned, that were separate category. Well, RFID technology is expected to evolve over time. So how do you charge the fees? Of you charge them per tag and see that as one device, that will be a lot of money. There will be a guidelines to the licensee on how to calculate the fees. Our current fee levels, like the permanent secretary said, we're using on a cost recovery principle. So does that mean more devices will add to our regulatory burden? It very much depends on the prevailing market development. Since our automatic devices that's not under manual control, so if customer complaints arise with a number of devices, we can consider alternative charging mechanism. So if we find out there are more devices that will lead to more regulatory workload, then we adopt a similar approach. So probably, well, there are more luggage going online. Let's say if I have 10 luggages, well, then some will be staggering. For the operators, well, that will be troubling since it's growing too fast. You need to consider whether you can streamline the procedures for the easier for industry to handle. Mr. Charles Mark. Just want to express the view, then you could give me the same answer in any case.
Well, for the installations, they might be one-off devices. For example, for a tap, that would be for use for just once in a while. And then for some of the luggage, well, some local companies are actually coming up with some new devices so that everything can just be put into the luggage, and then in the future, they can be sent to whatever country they like. For example, whether it's by way of 5G or roaming, so I'd be able to track my luggage wherever it goes. And also between airports, there can also be interconnectivity, so that with the tag, I'd be able to tell as to the whereabouts of my luggage, whether or not it's now in the New York airport or in the Singaporean airport, instead of just the Hong Kong International Airport. So the utilization rate would be very high. I understand that with regard to the complaints and also the network, well, the workload will increase, but then it's not going to grow in a linear manner, because with the WIoT, the business model would, if you just rely on that, it's not going to work, because the supervisory or the regulatory cost, if it's linear, it's not possible to recover the full cost. So you would really have to think about it. You will have to think hard about it. There should not be this linear relationship. Definitely, the economic benefit and also the figures will not just reach 1 million or 10 million, and then you should not be charging $200 for every device. So you will have to change the model, or you will also have to substantially cut the cost right from the beginning, so that we can become the pioneer in the application of WIoT. In fact, do you know if any other jurisdictions would be charging WIoT devices in a similar way, or are there any other jurisdictions which, like what I said, would be charging a very low fee or even offering that for free? So can you tell us more about the overseas experience? For the last question, I'll defer to my colleagues. I personally, in dealing with this issue, I have not been too much involved in looking at overseas experience, because the basis for our license fee mechanism or system is that, well, for IoT, we look at our own system and also our communication installations or equipment. Of course, where there are new systems or new technology that are being tested, yes, that's true. And we also have our own suspicion. That is, to what extent will that be used extensively, and also commercially, is it viable, and also when will it be extensively used? Well, at this point of time, we are not able to tell. For example, if we can foretell that by the middle of next year, well, for the 2 pieces of luggage, we have the IoT facility, and also for every household, we have at least 30 such tags. Well, at this juncture, we are simply not able to grasp the situation, and we are not able to tell exactly when it's going to happen. As I just said, we can see a lot of startups and also tech companies that are testing with these devices, and they're also identifying a longer-term running device which would be financially more viable. So we're waiting for that to happen. But then are we just sitting back and doing nothing, and then we'll just charge them $7 per device? We don't think that's the right approach. That's why we are taking the opportunity to substantially reduce the cost, and we have already made a pledge. That is, we'll be monitoring that closely. That is with regard to international developments, whether or not there might be opportunities available for us to use that more extensively once that picture becomes clearer. We'll take the opportunity to review it again. I'm not going to argue with you any further. I'd just like to get further supplementary information. And indeed, we are not just talking about substantially lowering the cost. We are talking about something new. And in fact, for anything new, so you just talk about substantially lowering that. It's like we originally buying mangoes, and then all of a sudden we are buying oranges, and you talk about lowering the fee. But then in the end, we might be buying grapes. So it's not comparing the like with the like, because for the cost of a mango, it's different from an orange, and it's even more different from grapes. So if it's a brand new product, then you will have to provide us with justifications and figures. At least you will have to share with us overseas experience before you introduce a new mechanism. Yes, Chairman. In formulating the licensing mechanism, of course, we have taken reference from overseas experience. Basically, for individual jurisdictions, their legal framework would be different. That's why the licensing mechanism would be different. And we have noticed that in quite a number of jurisdictions, they would not be charging for each device. they would be calculating the company, the overall revenue of the company, and then they'll just charge a certain percentage of that revenue. But then in our case, in fact, we are very serious about the fee to be imposed. We charge that on a cost recovery basis. So basically, we calculate our cost and then we'll charge that accordingly. So basically, there is room for us to adjust it downward whenever there is room for any cost saving. Yes, I've heard members' suggestion. Basically, there are some areas that you are not very clear about. You don't know to what extent that will be lowered, and you do not know what is going to happen. For example, with more subscribers and more people using such devices and so on. And in fact, you might be able to increase the fees and so on, or to the stakeholders and also the operators and also companies that are going to apply for license. They are somewhat confused. So I'd like to know, on what basis are you lowering the fee to $100 or $200? And also in the future, you said that that's because of the cost. Is it that you are not able to lower that further? And if it's proposed by the trade that you should lower it further, then what are you going to do? We will have to be clear about the cost calculation formula and also your operation mode, and also you will have to let us know very clearly as to the cost structure, or else it's about whether or not we should be supporting your proposal to increase or reduce the fee. Yes, Deputy Director General. Yes, thank you, Ms. Yong, for your questions. In fact, for the WIT IoT, well, we are charging $200 for every set of 100 connections. That's because under the UCL, they can provide two types of services. That's why, as the first step, I think the most important thing is to tie it in with the WIoT license. So the fee should be the same. So as the Permanent Secretary just said, the first thing for us to do is to align the two fees. Indeed, we'll be reviewing that on a regular basis. And then by that, we will be looking at how much should be charged. And as we have said, we have actually consulted the stakeholders, and they said that they would be prepared to support this. And some operators also said that, well, is it possible to align the two license fees, and that would be a better approach. And we are prepared to listen to their views, and then we'll look at the future situation to see if there is any further room for adjustment. Yes, let me supplement, Madam Chair. Well, for the license fees, we do conduct regular annual reviews, and we'll be looking at the trading funds operating costs, and then we'll look at the budget and also the costs, and then we will make a projection, and then we will come up with a budget to see how things would work out. On this occasion, when we conducted the consultation, we have disclosed some figures to the public, and then we have also heard the views of the operators concerning how the fees should be lowered, and they understand our purposes. And after the fee reduction, we expect that by 2020 and 2021, there is a chance that there might be a deficit. That being the case, we have also got a development fund where we have already saved up a sum of money, so that where there is a need, we can use that as a buffer. So we are willing to withdraw money from that reserve, even though by 2021 there might be a need for us to increase license fees, but then we are prepared to use the saving to reduce the pressure on any upward adjustment on fees. So in terms of provision of information, we have already provided adequate information for the stakeholders and operators to understand what we are doing. The whole purpose is to ensure that the licensing fee within a reasonable period of time would remain stable. With regard to government fees and charges, not many would have a chance to come down. But then on this occasion, what we are proposing is not just to enable the operators to know that in the long run what we're going to do, and also via the lowering of license fees, their operating costs would also be lowered. So as far as the operators are concerned and the public, and also as far as the public are concerned, I think they are supportive. Okay, I think it's time for us to wrap up our discussion. If you ask the trade, is it good to lower the fees, and also is it good to cut it down by such a margin? Of course, they welcome it. But then we think that we might have underestimated the development speed after the introduction of 5G and also the WIoT's development. Of course, it's a good thing to lower the fees. But then you might not have foreseen the rapid development of such trends, and it's kind of a sophisticated development. And if everything is done online, then how are you going to charge them? All right, for the suitcases or luggage, all right, if we lost a wallet or purse, and also there is a lock and key, and everybody would have to go online in order to track their luggage and so on, you might not have imagined as to how many items would be connected to WIoT. So how are you going to streamline everything so that your operating costs can be further lowered? Because if you ask the audit to do a check on you, all right, they would also be checking on the use of your resources, and if you're able to further streamline that, you'd also be able to save money, and then the operators would also find it easier to operate. So please do think about it. Okay, thank you. Next, we'll go on to the next item. That is to the retention of 2 supernumerary directorate posts in the Communication and Creative Industries branch of the CEDB. So I welcome to the administration team, and they'll be walking us through the relevant paper. And if the paper is supported by members, then in the course of 2019, that will be submitted to the ESC for scrutiny, and they will also be seeking approval from the Finance Committee. I'd like to remind members on the issue of declaration of interest in accordance with Rule 83 and 84. If there is any direct or indirect pecuniary interest involved, before you speak, please declare the nature of your interest. And after the administration's introduction, I'll open the floor to members' questions, and then we'll decide on the position of the panel. First, I'd like to welcome the administration's team, Mr. Clement Leung, Permanent Secretary from the Bureau, Mr. Edward To, Deputy Secretary, and also Mr. Tony Ip, Principal Assistant Secretary. Who is going to walk us through the paper? Yes, Permanent Secretary. Chairman and members, the purpose of the paper is to invite members to support the retention of 2 supernumerary directorate posts in the CEDB, that is the CCIB. There are 2 posts, and in June 2016, approval was sought from the FC for 3 years, and they would expire or lapse in June 2019. There is a need for us to retain the 2 posts in order to continue the review and amendment of the Broadcasting Ordinance and the Telecommunications Ordinance, and also to formulate legislative proposals to regulate person-to-person telemarketing calls. And with the approval obtained from the FC for the creation of these 2 posts, under the leadership of the 2 colleagues, a dedicated task force has been set up to look at the 2 pieces of legislation and also the P2P calls, and we have been working on schedule. And for the task force in May this year, they've already completed the review or the public consultation on the Broadcasting Ordinance, and the public was in support of the relaxation of the rules and procedures and so on. And they would also support the further development of the creative industry, and we will continue to work with the DOJ to draft the amendment bill, and our objective is to submit the legislation in 2019 to this council. With regard to the telecommunications regulatory framework review, by the end of this year, we're going to start the consultation, and that will last for 3 months, and that's about the advent of the 5G services and also the Internet of Things era. And we'll be further consulting this panel's views, and our objective is that taking reference from the feedback from the consultation exercise in 2019, we're going to introduce an amendment bill And then for the two supernumerary directorate posts, they're going to be responsible for the legislative work, and hopefully we'll be able to have a plain sail in this council for the implementation of the legislative amendments with regard to the regulation of P2P calls in middle of 2017. There was a consultation exercise. And then in April this year, 2018, at this panel, there was also a discussion. And in the course of that, we have also heard voices to step up the regulation on P2P calls. And we propose that we should set up a statutory do not call or DNC register in order to step up our regulation of P2P calls. And the two directorate post officers would be responsible for supervising the legislative work on the statutory DNC register, and we also need to balance public interest and the interest of the trade in operating or running their business. We are working on the legislative framework, and we also plan to come to this council in the second quarter of 2019 to have a discussion with this panel. So the two directorate officers will be responsible for the three pieces of legislation's drafting work. And with your support, in accordance with the mechanism, we'll go to the ESC. And we will also be seeking the approval from the FC. And we welcome members' questions.
Mr. Charles Mock, I support the retention of these two numeric directorate posts, and since the three key piece of work is vital and the public had waited for so long. Two simple questions here. As for the original staff, will continue in their duties? Second question, you already okay. You nodded, so that means yes. And the second question, for 3 years, let's say the regulatory framework review for the TV and sound and legislation. That's the first part of the job. And the telecom regulatory review has started, and the P2P calls have yet to start drafting legislation. So for 3 years, will there be an accurate estimate that this work will be complete within 3 years and don't need a further extension, or even it can be completed under 3 years, just to provide some leeway? So what is your prediction? Or maybe for the last few months, there will be a very light workload. Well, I nodded as in I got your question. Just to answer Mr. Mock. And for the task force, the purpose is to, the colleagues besides this will continue on their job. As you know, that the legislation is very complex, and the trade's views are also diverse as well. So we hope to retain the original team for this. And of course, the CSB might have other considerations, but so far, we hope that the colleagues who are familiar with this can continue in their role. As for whether 3 years will be an accurate estimate, well, it's hard to say. Well, drafting legislation, in my field, it would outside it would direct and simple. However, there were some other circumstances. Some of them we regard as straightforward, but after discussion with the solicitors, they may give rise to other kind of questions. For this three pieces of legislation, they're at various progress. For example, the TV and broadcast already being public consultation, as already drafting the amendments. As for the telecom regulatory review, we're finalizing the details of the consultation paper, and they will be launched at the end of this year with a 3 months consultation process term. The trade may ask for a longer period. In the document, some areas will be discussed and some may feel that some new item will be raised. For example, last time the chairman and deputy chairman mentioned that on the opening up of information whether it's feasible. After one meeting, we went back to discuss with the ITB to look into it to see what can be done as for whose bureau is responsible. So just have a rough idea, but for consultation and legislation, there's a high uncertainty. As for the P2P telemarketing, we've completed the consultation, and we're now planning for the legislative framework. And in LegCo, we heard very clearly on the public opinion that the political parties and the public and the members would like us to do more. And we can see enforcement will be quite challenging. So we just want to make sure we can balance the interests. We're currently developing the regulatory framework. We haven't entered the drafting stage yet. Well, at the mid or the end of 2019, we plan to prepare to introduce the bill. It very much depends on the LegCo's scrutiny period. We believe that 3 years is considered appropriate time frame. If we're able to do it under 3 years, this post may no longer be necessary. So we won't rule out that we'll remove this post earlier. So you plan to submit some bill at the end of next year on person-to-person telemarketing. So that means it must be passed within this year, since within the current term of LegCo. So I just remember that after adding additional manpower, that from 2019 onwards, then the one more. So you need to do what can be done within this legislative year. Otherwise, you will have to start over at the next term of LegCo, which is a waste of your time. I believe that you will prioritize your work quite well. Yes. So the LegCo election is a consideration factor. Dr. Lo Wai Kwok. I have no comments on this manpower proposal. Of these two supernumerary posts should be retained. So, Chairperson. So after we created ITB, shouldn't this creative industry be shifted to ITB instead? I believe that the administration today may not able to answer that. Well, you see, there's a balanced workload of a few boroughs, and the CEDB to take care of a lot of things on their plate. And before we don't have ITB, but after the creation of ITB, and shouldn't the relevant portfolio be transferred to them? Well, I believe they won't be discussed at the meeting, and THB have made the secretary extremely busy since needs to overlook in charge of a lot of things. It's just some whining, those are airing some grievances, because today we're not examining the role of the bureaus and the establishment. And of course, I'll support the supernumerary posts, but we must raise this long-standing problem again. Any response? Well, a brief one maybe. And in our paper, we mentioned that under the communications and creative industries branch have a very heavy workload. And for creative industries, under the Creative Smart initiative, we have a $1 billion injection and a policy address, and for the Film Development Fund, will plan to inject $1 billion. so that the colleagues within this branch have a very heavy workload. So there's a need for us to extend 3 years of this supernumerary post. Well, since we're talking about reviewing 3 main important pieces of legislation here, so there's a practical need. So my turn to follow up. So members asked that we only have 3 years to make good use of the time. Hopefully can conclude this exercise by the end of this term LegCo. So it's only about 2 years remaining. So you need 3 years. Well, so you need to think about it. And for the broadcasting ordinance and the telecommunication ordinance, the trade complaint is not conducive to development. The TO does not allow the telecom operators to disclose this anonymous data and open up the data. The Singapore had already made this relaxation, and your upcoming amendment, would you consider reviewing these 2 ordinances? I will answer the second part of your question first. And at the last panel discussion, so we had done some research. I can't guarantee it will be included in the consultation paper since a rather complex subject. Just want to take reference with foreign examples as for the ITB's views on opening of anonymous data, and how to deal with the telecom operators. Even though these are anonymous, however, there is still some sensitivity in light of recent incidents. So we have to deal with it very delicately, and we get to close to finalizing the consultation paper, so we can also bring up these issues in the consultation document. So please allow us some more time to preparation before revisiting this subject. As for the 2 years, 3 years, what a more ideal circumstance, hopefully the amendment can be passed. Then but how I can't guarantee that can be done. If not, in the new term LegCo, we need to reintroduce the bill. Well, that will take more time. So for us to propose 3 years, one of the prime consideration that if we couldn't do this in current term LegCo, they don't have to come back to obtaining 1 year extension at the next term LegCo. Does no one ask questions? Mr. Ray Chan. So review or amend the legislation whether to create and to extend the posting the one get underway. Just want to eager about the results of the review. The CDB had a poor track record, and for the control of obscene indecent articles ordinance. So after the endorsement of this panel, it didn't go anywhere. I wonder if that's the same fate. So after you submitting in the panel, when it comes to drafting the legislation, it will be could be 1 or 2 years apart.
On this occasion, the 2 directorate officers will be responsible for the 2 pieces of legislation, and when things are ripe, they'll come back to this panel and then they'll draft the legislation afterwards. So have you got the timetable already, assuming that everything goes smoothly? For example, for BO, I suppose there won't be many amendments. Still, we hope that we can do it bit by bit. So that's the first question. The second one, do we have a further phase of public consultation? Because earlier on, you did say that later on this year, there will be a further round of consultation. So is it that we'll first work on the findings of the public consultation in stage 1, and then we'll amend the legislation accordingly, or do we have to wait for another round of public consultation before we draft the amendment bill? So we'll work on whatever is ripe. Yes, we do have very clear timetable for all 3 pieces of legislation. On BO, yes, we have completed the public consultation, and our target is to submit the legislation by early next year. And then on TO, the regulatory framework, by the end of this year, a consultation paper will be published. Okay, and then in the second half of 2019, that's our target date. So we'll be submitting the amendment bill by the second half of next year, supposing that there won't be a lot of controversy about the substance of that. And then for P2P course regulation, the consultation has been completed, and we are working on the legislative framework, and the target date would be the second half of 2019. That might be deferred to early 2020. But then for the 3 pieces of legislation, the direction and also the timetable, they are very clear, and we do have a roadmap. So at least there isn't any ambiguity about the time frame. What about the TO? Well, we haven't started the consultation. We'll be issuing a consultation paper by the end of this year, and our target is to publish or to come up with an amendment bill after the consultation. I hope you'll be able to act accordingly, because after coming to this panel, once it's approved, before you actually submit the amendment bill, nothing happens. And if you're not able to get enough support, you may not be prepared to table the legislation before this council, and then you have to start afresh. So I'd just like to remind you on a tight schedule. Thank you. Yes, point taken. I understand your concern. Well, you said that for TO, okay, you've completed the consultation for BO, and you'll be coming back in early 2019. But then for TO, you haven't started the consultation. When are you going to do that? By the end of this year. So in the second half of 2019, you should be ready with the amendment bill. Yes, that's the target. So we have already fixed the data for the December regular meeting, and you'll be coming to us on the consultation on TO, right? Yes, we've already got a timetable, and also we have already fixed the title for that consultation. Okay, anything else? If not, I haven't heard any objection. I just heard that members would like it to be done as quickly as possible. So you can then go to the ESC for approval. Item 7, AOB. I'd just like to remind members that the date of next meeting would be the 10th of December at 2:30. If there is no further AOB, meeting is adjourned.
個諮詢冇。